Mineral producing countries, they aspire to climb up the value adding chain. But few have truly succeeded. One of the most influential African economists, Carlos Lopes, unravels the industrialization puzzle for us today. Welcome, Carlos, and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Following the commodities boom, Africa appeared split in two. The half of the continent specializing on natural resources, struggling, while the other half was doing quite well. How would you describe the state of Africa's economy today?
I would say we are in a slow growth path, which is not enough to make a dent on poverty and changing and transforming our economies, because we need at least 7% growth to do that. And obviously we got close to it in the first half of this new century. That is not too long. But then, the international context being what it is, and Africa being very fragile in the global economy, it depends very much on the trends and the patterns of the global economy. So right now, I wouldn't say we are in a very good picture. But this being said, yes, there are a number of countries that are doing extremely well.
Can you give me examples?
Well, we have about 6 countries that are in the top 10. We have countries that are, for that category, recognized as being doing it for a while, like Ethiopia. Countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, countries like Rwanda. Others that come and go, but in general, you always have a number of countries in the top 10 of the best performing economies in the world. And as you said, most of them don't have natural resources. At least they don't have it in the quantity that is attributable to other countries. Why they are doing well? Well, basically because they are out of the laziness of having a source of income that is very easy to tap. And normally the economies were not transformed enough, meaning they were not industrialized, they were not basically modernized, a lot of informality. So it's easy for the fiscal apparatus to just grab one source of income that they can control and basically look the other way when it comes to complex issues that they have to deal with. Whereas countries that are very rich in one commodity, they can just go and look for resources from that commodity, and then they have surprises, because when the prices go down, they don't do so well. We had an uptick on commodity prices for a while. We had a lot of demand that was added in the global market for commodities, so Africa benefited from it. The moment things turned south, we saw the consequences.
Let me ask you, do you believe in the resource curse? Have natural resources been bad for Africa?
Well, resources are not a fatality, and there is no correlation that demonstrates that when you have resources, you have to go through a curse. But it is true that in a lot of countries it does occur. It does occur for political reasons. So what we need to fix is politics, not the resources. We can explore resources in different ways. We can resource it for the good of the majority. We can transform it into a public good. We can certainly do it in a sustainable way, so we don't damage the environment. We need resources. There are no possibilities of actually creating wealth without tapping into some sort of resources, so we need them. But the problem is when we use them in a way that basically it's not commensurate with the aspirations of the majority, and becomes basically trapped into a capture by an elite or by a small group of people, or when it's the object of illicit practices, namely illicit financial flows being probably the most prominent. I'm very concerned that in Africa we have gone through a resource curse for too long. And what is fascinating is to see that with the new technologies developing, a lot of people are saying, well, we are going through robotization, automation, artificial intelligence, and it's going to be possible to accelerate all these phenomena, given that machine intelligence is now becoming really more cheap than ever. And we are going to be basically replacing a lot of human labor by automated processes. So therefore, industrialization maybe is no longer available for countries that have not done it at a good time, during the good time. Well, I have a bit of a dispute about this reading that is too linear. But more important than that is to mention that all the new technologies do require certain types of minerals. The high concentration of the new materials, let's call them strategic natural resources, is mostly in Africa. So we can go through another curse, or we can just use this as the unique opportunity and window of opportunity to move into a different pattern and transform resources into something that is a capital good that is going to benefit the majority, or recurrent patterns of behavior that reproduce bad governance, corruption, etc.
So what would it take to avoid the curse this time?
I think one of the things that really is absolutely fundamental is to do what the economists like to call structural transformation, which is to move the economies from basically a low productivity to a high productivity pattern through modernization. We can do it from the, let's say, rural sector, primary sector, to more urban related activities and industrialization, or we can do it from industrialization to services. But if you do it without the modernization, we are going to create a lot of people that don't have formal jobs, decent jobs. They will have informal activities. They will survive probably. But that's not really what we want as a balanced society and as a way of going in a direction that is going to avoid inequality. So that's why structural transformation is absolutely a priority for Africa. When you do structural transformation, then you know how to deal with resources, because you are modernizing the entire tissue, in the entire fabric.
A lot of countries are now embracing diversifications in some ways, and some are moving into manufacturing. We see industrial parks in Ethiopia, car industry in Morocco. Do you see in general that can we expect a surge in manufacturing in Africa?
Well, you see, for a while, countries in Latin America in particular used a model called import substitution. Then Asia replaced that with export-led manufacturing. So that's why we call China the factory of the world, etc. And I think both models have some limitations, and definitely they are no longer available for Africa, at least at the scale that will make a difference. For a variety of reasons. Regulatory systems have become very complex. Intellectual property is highly skewed, concentrated in a few places. Value chains have become extremely sophisticated and global. Financing has become more scarce for entrants, like most of the African countries are. So for a variety of reasons, even before we get into the local context, which is poor logistics, poor education, etc., becomes really very difficult barriers for the old type of industrialization. So yes, there are industrial parks in Ethiopia. There are a certain number of good examples, and I'm actually very fond of those examples to demonstrate the need of something else, which is the need for an industrial policy. When countries have an industrial policy, they basically become sophisticated, ambitious, and coherent. Countries that try industrialization through the Ministry of Industry will never do it. It's only when it becomes national policy and you integrate private, public sector, all the actors, and you try to identify the very few niches that are still available, then you have a chance.
So still available globally?
Yes, well, some niches are still available. Like for instance, if we go the old tested models, there is a number of jobs in China that will have to be exported somewhere else because it's too expensive now in terms of labor costs for them to remain in China. So the Chinese themselves will find locations where they can delocalize. It's their turn of delocalizing. But this will be low value added type of industrialization. like, producing T-shirts, garments, and stuff like that. So they will keep the sophisticated cars and the robots and the electronics, etc. So they are basically dishing out the part that has least value. So countries that are equipped with a good industrial policy can grab this opportunity, cases that you have mentioned. But this is not going to go far, and it's going to be just a few countries. But we do have other possibilities of industrializing, and for me, much more promising. For instance, agro-processing, because we have a consumer market that is growing faster than anywhere else in the world. People consume food first. Most of the food processed is imported, and it's not rocket science. I mean, to produce yogurt, you don't need to have a very complicated process, but we import 60% of the yogurt that we consume in Africa. So why do we do that? So if I multiply the different examples, we get to the 53 billion mark of imported processed food. So this can be produced in Africa. In fact, Africa can go one step further. It can export food because it can do it organically, etc. So that is a much better bet for industrialization, and one that is more accessible because it doesn't require huge transformations of the economic structure.
But some say that even agriculture will be a high-tech industry in the future. So will it require investment in education, for example?
Yes, but it's already happening in Africa with much success. Like, for instance, apps that allow for different agricultural entrepreneurs to take advantage of services that before were very difficult to obtain. Access to credit is another one. So I think the combination of new technology and latecomer, sort of situation is not necessarily bad, because you can go straight into, let's say, green agriculture, or if you do even some of the production of some goods that are now going to be labeled in the consumer markets, green or not, in a much more stronger, marketing way than before. Africa does not need to make a huge effort to produce green, because the most important component of green is how your energy mix is organized. Well, we just so happen, because we are latecomers, to be in a situation where we can choose between renewables and fossil fuel without any difficulty, because the costs now are the same. Before they were not. So these are some opportunities that Africa has to grab.
You mentioned energy as one of the factors for industrialization in Africa, and we're now in an energy transition and in a process of moving away from fossil fuels, and there will be consequences for both energy producers and consumers. But do you see more threats or opportunities for the continent in this context?
Well, we are going to democratize access to energy, because now with renewables becoming cheaper and being so readily available from a technological point of view, financing is a different story, but it's coming. You basically have every single country that can produce energy, because some will have geothermal, some will have wind, some will have solar, some will have hydro. So it's possible really to find your renewable energy, which means that everybody becomes a bit independent. But that independence and that fragmentation of the energy markets is actually not the full story, because we are moving into a world where strategically for your security what you need is stocks. You have to stock the fossil fuels. Whereas in the future it's going to be about flows, how you control the flows. Controlling the flows, particularly the grids, etc., is going to become much more interdependent. So there will be new forms of trade around energy, because the potential for actually stocking becomes less a priority, but becomes also a more difficult fulfillment. It's going to be very difficult for countries to actually control the flows completely. And that is going to create a completely different situation from what we are used to. And it's true that countries that are very rich with fossil fuels are going to be losers in this game. They already are, because you see the volatility of the markets. And I think the advantage is that you can industrialize, taking into account this new world. So it's industrialization without the smokestacks, as people like to say.
Carlos, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Osa.